Okay, well, having decided on the subject of today's discussion and posed the questions, I thought I'd better at least have an attempt at answering them. It seems only fair. Thus, I'm actually going to work my way through those questions as they were set out in the blurb for this session. And in the process, that's actually going to lay out what I think defines human nature. Of course, we've got the unfair advantage in that I posed the questions in the first place, so there's something new with it. Let me begin with the question of agency, because I know it's a contentious one, I mean, especially with Rita, but perhaps with other people in the room. I am actually firmly in the camp of those who think that our capacity to think, to make decisions based on those thoughts, many of them rational, though by no means all, and then to act accordingly is the key factor that sets us apart from animals. In other words, I do believe that we are agents of change, which of course was the title of today's event, that we're masters of our own destiny, and that we're unique in the animal kingdom in actually having that attribute. I also think that consciousness is a unique attribute of human beings. And of course, I don't simply mean that we're conscious in the sense of awake, as Rita was making clear, but actually that we're self-aware, reflective beings. This is intimately connected with our nature as agents of change, as it were. Probably the most important factor in making this possible is our highly developed language skills. But it's only one factor. There's a lot of evidence that we're born with the capacity to intuit grammar and so on, if you look at Chomsky and people like this. So we've got spoken language, and that's a central structure in our actually ability to communicate complex ideas and have complex thoughts. However, that's far from sufficient on its own to explain consciousness. It should be clear by now that I don't buy the idea that agency, consciousness, or free will for that matter, are illusions created by our brain, which is clearly what Rita thinks. I think they're real outcomes of the type of being that we are. And I'll come back to that point as I elaborate on my argument. But first I want to actually directly address the questions set out for this discussion. The first of which was, is there a universal human nature? Well, that's an easy one, yes. Should I stop there? Obviously, that leads to the question, what do we actually all have in common? Which was also posed in the blurb. Well, the attributes are far too numerous to list. I mean, that could take me all day, but what I want to do is just pick out a few key ones. The principal ones are the ones I've already mentioned: agency, consciousness, our ability to rationalise, the linguistic ability that we're born with, if you like, and the ability to plan ahead and to adapt our environment rather than adapt to it, that actually follows from all of those things. There are also many other things. There are the huge suite of emotions we all share, such as sympathy, happiness, sadness, anxiety, anger, and so on. I could go on all day. And special capacities, such as genuine altruism, which I think only exists in human beings, with no apparent altruism that appears in the natural world beyond us. And there's, of course, our shared biology, bipedalism, our opposing thumbs, and Ray Tallis, who's going to speak this afternoon, is very keen on the opposing thumb and hand. I'm sure he'll tell us something about that later on. But I think perhaps the most important is our nature as social beings. It's the fact that we live in complex societies with structures of our own making that truly sets us apart. And I think this social aspect of what we are is what creates agency, consciousness, and free will. So it's the social dimension of our makeup that makes me doubtful of attempts to reduce the mind and consciousness, etc., simply to brain function, since the mind, in a certain sense, resides outside of the body, let alone the brain. The mind is created by our social interactions. It's formed by the places we grow up in, the society we live in, the people we meet, the books we read. But it's a two-way process. We, in turn, as agents, alter the places we grow up in, the society we live in, the people we meet. And some of us write books that other people read. So there's something, two-way going on there. So to attempt to understand all those complex interaction solely in terms of what happens in the brain of an individual doesn't seem to make sense. It strikes me sometimes that many of those who make big claims about human nature, especially those in certain camps like evolutionary psychology and neuroscientists, are actually very dismissive of the social sciences. But surely the study of humanity needs to embrace the study of social systems and history and politics and arts, and the differences between these elements at different times and places, if it's to tell us anything about ourselves. These things must inform what we are. How are we to understand social change if we look only at individual minds? It reminds me a little of Margaret Thatcher's famous dictum, what was it? There's no such thing as society, only individuals. But that's of course not true. There is such a thing as society, and it informs what we are as individuals. It's a mistaken type of reductionism, I believe, one that's particularly faulty precisely because of the complexity of the type of being that we are as human beings. Another thing I think we all have in common, but is rarely mentioned, is our ability to change. We're remarkably elastic beings. We literally change our minds when we learn new things or have new experiences. Now, this sometimes means changing our opinion, but I'm saying something more fundamental than that. We actually change what we are. I'm definitely not the same person I was 10 years ago, let alone when I was a child, because I've seen different things, read books, and had great debates. But most importantly, I've reflected on those things and altered who I am. I think this is something that all people do, to different degrees. If it weren't the case, then all societies at all times would be governed by the same rules and the same morals and the same prejudices and so on. And that clearly isn't the case. We wouldn't have historical change if that were the case. So that brings me to the last question I pose, which is, what makes us different from animals? Well, I think I've probably pretty much covered that already in what I've already said. I don't think any animal we know of shares any of those key attributes that I've already drawn attention to. So agency, consciousness, rationality, planning, the ability to transform ourselves and our environment, both the physical environment and the societies we live in. All those things, I think, are unique to human beings. Now, this understanding might seem a little frustrating, as it suggests there are so many complex interactions that we'll never be able to define human nature, but I actually don't see it that way. I don't think that, I do think that different disciplines do provide genuine insights into what it is to be human, from genetics, neuroscience and game theory to politics, history and sociology. I'm aware of the time, so end on a high note. Let's just say this way of looking at human beings keeps the door open to new insights from unexpected sources, which is something that any scientist, whether a natural or a social scientist, should welcome. But perhaps even more importantly, it allows for the possibility that people in the future will be better than we are.